This video contains elements that are not suitable for children under the age of 14. Viewer discretion is advised.
We're halfway through the specials, folks. So far we've covered Tatmar, Calling All Engines, The Great Discovery, and Nitrogen specials. But now let's get on to the Brenna era specials and see how they stack up against them. Well, we're covering 6 of them for this video, but fear not viewers, we'll get to one of them in a standalone review. Let's kick things off with King of the Railway, the first special officially under Andrew Brenner's pen, and see what bar he set for it. Sir Robert Norrenby, the Earl of Sodor, returns to Sodor after traveling the world, and he has big plans in store. He's restoring Ulfstead Castle. Meanwhile, Gordon and Spencer get competitive to see who's the fastest, only to come across 2 streamlined engines called Connor and Caitlin, and Stephen the Rocket tries to find out what his special job is after he's restored, only to get trapped in a mine beneath Ulfstead Castle. Yeah, that's quite a lot to take in, isn't it? For his first official special as head writer, Andrew Brenner seemed to take the story in a lot of different directions, yet he manages to tie them all up together at the end. Of course, the trailer that was released for the US audience didn't exactly give us a clear picture as to what the story was going to be about, which led to many tearing it apart, thinking that the show was going to get worse, not better. Thankfully, that was not to be the case. Much of the story is based around Railway series lore, such as the presence of Sir Robert Norrenby, likely named for Sir Richard Robert Norrenby, Duke's current grace, and the mention of King Godred, based upon Godred's MacHarold and Croven, although he seems to be more based upon the latter. And of course, there's Ulfstead Castle, which would become a staple of the CGI series right to the end. Outside of references to Sodor lore, we even get flashbacks to Stephen's pre-Sodor days based upon what happened at the Rainhill trials of 1829. Out of the newbies introduced in this special, only Sir Robert Norrenby and Stephen play major roles, while Billy's just there. Connor and Caitlin, however, are introduced very late into the special, close to the 39-minute mark, while they could easily have been held back for Series 17, perhaps being hinted at towards the end of the special. Not only that, Gordon and Spencer's subplot could have also worked as a standalone episode, and much like the actual special, it would be the presence of Connor and Caitlin that would make both of them feel threatened. Maybe we reveal who actually wins the race, since we never saw who won at the end of the special. Oh, let me guess. Rachel, is it?
Yep, reviewing King of the Railway, I see. Mind if I take the reins for a bit?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, going on what you said about the plot being all over the place, you're right. If I was doing this, I'd probably cut Caitlin and Connor and have them appear in season 17, as you said. This would effectively drop Gordon and Spencer's subplots. I'd also give Millie a larger role, instead having a conflict with her and Duke about who should be the Earl's engine. Come on! Why didn't the production team even think of that? It seems like an obvious plot point. One of the current Earl's predecessors is Duke's namesake after all. This could be a good chance to see how Duke bounces off Skarloey, Rhaenys, Rusty, Duncan, and Luke, as none of the books or the television series really showcase this at all. Not that Luke was in the books, but that's besides the point. And of course, throw in some adorableness with Han and Peter Sam with their grandpup in there. They could act as mediators between Duke and Millie. And I'd also probably trim down the roles of the standard agents in general. This honestly seems like it would be fit for the Skarloey crew. Same with Blue Mountain Mystery, actually. What do you think, Zach?
That would have definitely worked out. Duke is a crown jewel out of Audrey's characters, and yet he's never mentioned in the CGI series, much less given a physical appearance, likely because Mattel didn't think the derogate engines were marketable, which could also be why they never had a starring role since Series 18, Runaway Engine notwithstanding. That aside, this has been a pretty short review, but there's not a whole lot I could have said about King of the Railway in hindsight. The animation doesn't look that good when compared to the future Brenner specials, but the facial expressions feel a lot more natural, and the camera angles are more dynamic. It was a good thing that they had 2 separate animation teams, one for the specials and one for the episodes, to prevent one or the other from being burned out. The story was a bit clunky in places, but the characters and the moments between them, especially Stephen and Sir Robert, are a lot stronger than what we had in the Nitrogen era, and the dialogue, of course, is hugely improved. I would give King of the Railway a 7 out of 10. Good, but not great. However, I don't think anyone could have predicted how much better things would be with Andrew Brenner on board. For a while, at least. Now let's move on to Tale of the Brave, a special that was released to mark 30 years of Thomas and Friends on the small screen. How much improvement was made between King of the Railway and this special? Let's find out. When Thomas is sent to work at the China clay pits with Bill and Ben during a landslide, he sees giant footprints which Percy thinks must be a monster and becomes afraid. He then meets a visiting engine called Gator who takes on a big rubber roll to the little green engine. James makes fun of Percy for being scared, but he proves how cowardly he can be in the midst of his arrogance. Judging by the premise alone, I can definitely say that Tale the Brave is a far superior take on Day of the Diesels, in that none of the characters are sympathetic assholes at worst, the plot doesn't try too hard to be taken seriously, and it's an overall pleasurable viewing experience. I'd end it right there, but let's dig a bit deeper, shall we? I'm gonna start off by saying that James was a good choice for the special's antagonist. He takes advantage of the fact that Percy's afraid of the idea of a monster on Sodor, but in doing so, James shows that he is just as afraid, especially when he thinks Gator is a monster and has an accident while taking the Flying Kipper. Now that the tables have turned on James, he takes his anger and insecurity out on Percy by scaring him with a scrap monster. This causes Percy to want to run away when no one seems to believe him, even Thomas is doubtful, but Gator consoles Percy that running away from your problems is never the answer. If only many people in real life actually follow that bit of advice. Thomas and Percy are both written far better in Tale of the Brave than they were in Day of the Diesels, with the latter character especially shining through towards the end. Even though James had bullied him throughout the special, Percy still risks his life to save James in the landslide of the clay pits. Not to knock on Thomas, of course, but the fact that he's cut off before he could get to Percy makes the Green Engine's triumph all the more satisfying. Shame that I threw that bit of character development out the window for Free Steam Engine's gruff and especially panicky Percy.
It must be a troll. A troll? Trolls live under bridges. Don't you remember the Three Billy Goats gruff?
Thomas! I'm coming to save you!
Did I mention how much I hate panicky Percy? Because I hate that episode with every fiber of my being.
With all due respect, Zach, considering that Thomas had gone missing at least twice before, Misty Island Rescue is non-canon as far as I'm concerned, and the fact that Thomas nearly fell off a mountain in Big World Big Adventures, and imprisoned in Journey Beyond Sodor, the former being outright mentioned in this episode, need I add, I do find Percy's fears to be at least somewhat justified. And that's not even counting the dangers that Thomas had gone through in the 70 verse so far, nearly falling down a mine forever in United We Stand, and nearly being burnt alive by Diesel 10 and Diesel 10 Strikes Back.
That's as may be, Rachel, but you'd think that Percy would have overcome his anxieties by this point.
Anxiety isn't easy to overcome. I know. I get that a lot myself. If someone I knew kept getting lost and or nearly killed, I'd be worried for them too, no matter how much time had passed. I wouldn't be surprised if Percy got a counseling session after this episode. The poor guy. You do understand what I'm getting at, right?
We're not going to come to any agreement on this episode, are we?
Nope, but it's probably going to be a debate for another time.
Note to self, don't get on Rachel's bad side, ever. Anyway, as an aside, the premise of Thomas working with Bill and Ben do the bridge work on his branch line appears to be inspired from Thomas and the twins. Even if Christopher Audrey's books will forever be in the shadow of his father's, it's nice that they're being referenced in some capacity. Although Thomas, James, and Percy are the major players throughout this special, it's not just them who shine through. Tale of the Brave is practically an ensemble piece, whether it be Bill and Ben rescuing Thomas from the first landslide despite having previously played a joke on him, Marion's eccentricity, and Emily's big sister persona in full force. Oh, and did I mention this little gem?
Be careful out there, James. Monsters can be very hard to see in the dark.
But outside of the main trio, the real standout character was Gator. While he's never given a reason for appearing on Sodor here or in Series 18, his friendship with Percy is one of the purest of the entire franchise, and Gator's departure at the end of the special held far more weight than Heroes and Hero of the Rails did. Sure, Gator did return to Sodor for a long-lost friend, but he hasn't been seen since. But that doesn't really bother me that much, as it made Gator's appearances feel more special, whereas Hero just exists to appease a fan base that didn't need it to begin with. Oh, and speaking of Series 18, did I mention that Toad's Bright Idea takes place within Tale of the Brave? 'Cause it did. An episode taking place during a special was something that has never happened before and, to my knowledge, has never happened since. Somewhere there exists an extended version of Tale of the Brave with Toad's Bright Idea woven in, kinda like what I did for Red Engines and Shed Trouble. Long and short, Tale of the Brave is basically an ensemble piece. In fact, this special focuses more on character moments than any other special before and since. Not that specials to come didn't have them, mind you, but the strength of the characters was at its strongest in Tale of the Brave here. This special marks a new peak in storytelling for Thomas and friends. The characters are at their absolute best, the emotional moments do the job they're supposed to, the theme about bravery is strong, and the story has the right mix of drama and comedy. Particularly this little take that moment towards the Nitrogen era.
Hello, Thomas! guess what? Let me see. Have you been asked to deliver a giant balloon on a flatbed?
And a little shout out to Shakespeare's Hamlet.
Oh, alas, poor dinosaur.
Tale of the Brave is the quintessential Thomas and Friends special as it captures the feel of the franchise the most with its heart, charm, and character. A 10 out of 10 from me. If you ask me, it really is that amazing and deserves more recognition than it's really given. And so we come to what many fans have called the magnum opus of Thomas and Friends specials, Sodor's Legend of a Lost Treasure. Let's see if it really lives up to that title. When Thomas causes trouble by derailing Gordon's coaches at Knapford Station, Sir Topham Hatt punishes his number one engine by having him work on the Harwick extension while a new tank engine called Ryan works on his branch line. After getting into another accident, Thomas meets with Sailor John and his sailboat Skiff and helps them find the lost treasure of Captain Callus, unaware of the pirates' true intentions. Well, what can I say? Sodor's Legend of a Lost Treasure is another peak for storytelling in Thomas and Friends specials. In fact, I dare say there's a pretty razor-thin gap between this and Tale of the Brave. But which of the two do I prefer? Well, let's delve into Lost Treasure before I make my decision. After being portrayed as an all-loving hero with shades of cheekiness in the previous two Brenner specials, free if you include Blue Mountain Mystery, Thomas is back to his characterization in the early Railway Series books by letting his cheekiness get the better of him, landing him into trouble more than once. That could be an entire video discussion on its own, but the long and short is that Thomas learns that you'll never get far in life if you refuse to take responsibility for your actions. Yes, I know some will argue that he should have grown out of that phase by now, but I've got a simple counter-argument to that. Many adults in real life have difficulty admitting as to when they're in the wrong and will blame others for their mistakes. In fact, I'd argue that Thomas's character arc holds up just as much as it did back in 2015, perhaps even more so. Anyway, with how much Thomas kept causing trouble, with every incident he's involved in, his arrogance is humbled and he learns to admit his mistakes, eventually regaining Sir Topham Hatt's favor.
Hey, Zach?
Oh, hey Mike, what's up?
Since we're bringing up Legend of the Lost Treasure, don't you think we should talk about this scene?
Thomas the Tank Engine!
Uh-oh.
What are you playing at now? I thought you could learn to be more responsible if I sent you to work here.
But, sir, this time it's really not my fault.
No, Thomas, I've had quite enough of your excuses. Go to your shed immediately, and you can stay there for the rest of the afternoon.
Oh, right. If we didn't bring that up, I'd imagine a lot of people would go off on me in the comments for not doing so. Care to do the honors, Mike?
Gladly. First off, while I do agree that that was the worst moment of the movie, emphasis on the word moment, I feel that a lot of people are missing the point behind Thomas's behavior in that scene. Up until that point, Thomas had been reckless when shunting Gordon's coaches into Knapford Junction, and Sir Topham sent him to work on a new branch line while Ryan took over for the day. And while Thomas was bringing the rails and ballasts to the new branch line, he wasn't paying attention to the danger signs and ended up in a hole in the ground. Both of these incidents, along with the arrival of a new tank engine, made Thomas feel as though his position as Sir Topham's number one engine was being threatened. Which brings us to the dynamite incident. When Ryan needed to fill up with coal, he didn't know about the bad coal from the old hopper, and Thomas didn't warn him about it. Then when Ryan came back, a dynamite fuse in one of his trucks was lit, and Thomas had tried to clear it out of the way before it exploded. From a distance, Sir Topham thought Thomas was trying to hurt Ryan. That, combined with how much money was wasted, led to his frustration with the little blue tank engine. Not only that, Thomas previously caused issues with delaying the express, and by extension several other trains, and acted rather carelessly when shunting the flatbeds into Callus's cavern. On top of that, dynamite's costly to obtain, and Thomas basically wasted some of Topham's money. Wanting to get back into Topham's good graces again, Thomas tries to stop Sailor John from escaping with Captain Callus's treasure that night, and by morning, thinking he's in trouble again, he tries to apologize until Sir Topham says this.
There's nothing to be sorry about. I'm proud of you. Ryan told me everything, and I know you did your best to stop that pirate getting away.
And then there's this bit that brings things full circle.
My engines are much more important to me than any treasure, and you, Thomas, are my number one.
It's like what Zach said about the confrontation scene in Blue Mountain Mystery, or, for a non-Thomas example, Twilight and Pinky's falling out in the 2017 My Little Pony movie. It seems a fair few people miss the point and take sides before looking at both of them and or the subtext as to why it happened. My point is, you cannot let one conflict ruin an otherwise excellent product, especially when said conflict is fixed by the end.
There's something I would like to add in as well, guys. I do get that Thomas was to blame for starting his string of mistakes, which slowly made him isolated at the time. But who do you think is really to blame for this whole mess? Gordon, probably? I know most other people would think that it wasn't entirely Gordon's fault to begin with. But if you think about it, if Gordon had kept his big mouth shut, he probably wouldn't give Thomas those silly ideas which led him to making those mistakes to begin with. So, honestly, I think Gordon is entirely to blame, and yet he shows no responsibility or remorse for starting these chain of events whatsoever.
Yeah, that is something that was never fully resolved or brought up again. Anyway, and speaking of human characters, there's Sailor John, one of the best antagonists that the franchise has ever had. Although we don't know much about his backstory, I get the impression that he's been looking for Captain Callus's treasure for a long time. That must have caused him to go bad by the time Thomas meets him and Skiff. Thanks to John Hurt's performance, rest peacefully, Officer Kane, we're practically drawn to the sailor's charisma, even though it's all an act. The best bad guys are those you love and hate at the same time, and Sailor John is P.T. Boomer done right as A. He's the villain of an actual Thomas the Tank Engine movie, and B. There's more mystery in what you're not told as opposed to what you are. Speaking of celebrity guest stars, Eddie Redmayne makes his sole voice acting appearance as Ryan the Purple Engine before being taken over by Stephen Keenman. While I will say that Ryan is Stanley done better, the former felt a bit too similar to the latter, which is where the similarities to The Great Discovery come in, but thankfully, Ryan has since been given more definition as a character. Although Keenman did make Ryan sound a bit too similar to Paxton, I feel Redmayne's performance here stands out more. I would have liked to see what else he could have done as Ryan had he stuck around for a bit longer. As I contrasted the drama in Thomas and Sailor John's story, Marion's subplot adds some much-needed comedy relief when she thinks Oliver the Great Western Engine and Oliver the Excavator are the same and believes that the Arsdale Trio, making their debut in the TV series, are magic engines. It's even funnier that nobody takes her seriously as they just get on with their work as usual. Olivia Colman just steals every scene she's in.
Oliver? Oliver? But I thought you made a wish. I thought you changed into a digger! There can't be two Olivers!
Yes, there can!
Are there weak points in the story? Unfortunately, yes. The subplot with Thomas finding Captain Callus's ship and Rocky taking the credit for it is never properly resolved. The rest of the story hinged on that, yet it's dropped in favor of Thomas finding comfort with Sailor John before discovering his true colors. Mind you, that's nothing compared to Henry's subplot in thinking that Skiff is a ghost ship, especially as it doesn't get a proper resolution either. Henry's characterization was not all that good in Series 18 and 19, especially if you compare it to Henry's hero in Series 20 onward, but Lost Treasure was perhaps where Henry's wimpy personality reached its nadir. Neither subplot is something that hugely affects the main story, but they do stick out like a sore thumb. But perhaps the biggest problem with Lost Treasure is that the continuity between said special and Series 19 is quite muddled. The special takes place after Series 19, yet it was released before it was even halfway finished airing on TV. This is a problem that will later result in continuity errors with The Great Race in Series 20, and especially Journey Beyond Sodor in Series 21. I'll delve deeper into that when I talk about The Avenger Begins, but that special being a last-minute addition into the production schedule really screwed things up in the long run. Who knows what might have happened had it not been commissioned by Mattel? Sodor's Legend of a Lost Treasure is the special that feels the most like a Thomas and Friends movie, and along with Tale of the Brave, it proves that Thomas doesn't need another theatrical film so long as the right people are in charge. Granted, Lost Treasure was released in theaters for a couple of weekends, but the point still stands. Like Tale of the Brave, Lost Treasure gets a full score of 10 out of 10, but which of the two do I prefer? I'm gonna go for Tale of the Brave, because of Lost Treasure, while it does have the stronger story, it does have a subplot or two that's never fully resolved, not even in Series 20, whereas Tale of the Brave feels more complete in terms of story, and it's that reason that I believe Sodor's Legend of a Lost Treasure is worthy of a silver medal. Next on our list is The Great Race, or as we over at Melting Pottery Media like to dub it, Thomas and the Great Railway Show, the musical. With Sodor's Legend of a Lost Treasure setting the bar pretty high for Thomas specials, it's safe to say that The Great Race had a lot to live up to, especially since 2016 was the year that Flying Scotsman returned to service and the Summer Olympics were being held in Rio de Janeiro and Brazil. And The Great Race failed to meet expectations. Thomas and Gordon both learn from Flying Scotsman about the Great Railway Show taking place in the mainland, and the Blue Tank Engine gets excited about wanting to take part in it, but every time he tries to partake in one competition, another engine takes that spot. Thomas gets jealous of Ashima, an Indian tank engine who had been mistakenly left behind by a ship that docked at Brendam, because she's partaking in the Great Railway Show, but she assures him that he doesn't have to change anything about himself. Basically, think of this as the bastard love child of Tale of the Brave in Series 11's Dream On, and that's the Great Race in a nutshell. So what went wrong there? Well, the first point in contention is the biggest problem with the entire special, Thomas's character. I could believe his character arc in Lost Treasure, as for every fuck-up he gets involved in, he becomes more humble and something is gained by the end of it. But as for the Great Race, it's basically his worst portrayal in any special since the Nitrogen era, and having it come right off the heels of Lost Treasure makes it absolutely disappointing. Thomas basically acts like a whiny, selfish crybaby, yet the narrative expects me to root for him when he basically replaces Percy in the shunting challenge.
At least he's better here than in these two specials.
No, Diesel! I'm sure Sir Topham Hatt means a really useful steamy. You'll never be that. Sodor steamies don't go to the Diesel Works. It's dark, and it's dirty, and it's full of diesels. Diesels can be devious.
You say Thomas's portrayal in The Great Race is bad? Well, apparently you've forgotten all about his respective portrayals in both Misty Island Rescue and Day of the Diesels. Thomas was a racist bastard in the former special, and an absolute, and in your words, xenophobic prick in the latter special. I will gladly take Thomas here instead of him in those two absolute shitfests of specials, where he was unrootable throughout.
Whatever. And what about Percy? Oh, I'll get to that soon enough. But what else is wrong with A Great Race?
Nothing's wrong with it. Sure, it's a divisive special, but there are people who like it.
Only you would say nothing was wrong with A Great Race, Matt. But I'm going over why I don't like it.
Yeah, but there are other people out there who do like it too.
Zach, Matt, you two better not be getting into violence back there.
Well, maybe if that one guy over here didn't decide to butt in. Anyway, it's basically the story and theme of Dream On, or if you're sticking with CGI, Best Engine Ever, mashed up with the character moments of Tale of the Brave, but not anywhere near the heart and charm of either. Case in point, Thomas and Ashima's dynamic is literally that of Percy and Gators, but only one side benefits from a lesson that he didn't need to learn, while the other just exists for the sake of merchandise. Well, most of the special feels like it exists to sell toys rather than tell a story, but still. However, there is a big issue at hand with the be yourself moral, but I'll talk more about that towards the end. What really makes Thomas and Ashima's dynamic pointless is that while taking the local from Vickerstown, Ashima says she doesn't know how to get to the mainland. Why couldn't she be outright told on how to get there? I know that a lot of people argue, well, if she got to Vickerstown by herself, there'd be no story, but that's exactly my argument. If a solution to your story or subplot is this blatantly obvious, maybe you should reconsider finishing the story and start over again. But what about the rest of the subplots for The Great Race?
I think I know the perfect one to start off with. Somebody won't tell me the world is gonna roll me.
I think that's a good idea, Blake. Let's get this one out of the way. The subplot with Philip and Vinny is easily the worst of the bunch. Vinny is an unlikable prick. Yes, bullies are meant to be unlikable, but there has to be something to like about them, and Vinny has nothing. He comes across as a borderline negative North American stereotype, which is ironic since that Brenner is an American-born himself. I'm glad that Vinny never appeared once in series 22 to 24, because if he did, I'm pretty sure they find some way to screw up like they did with Ace's Brave Jump. Philip and Vinny's subplot leads to nothing, especially as neither engine learns anything from this, and it could easily have been cut altogether and nothing would change. At least it was handled better than Apology Impossible.
And pretty much like the film, Vinny also has a divisive following. There are those who hate him for the reasons that Zach mentioned, and then there are those who like him for being a jerk and the fact that it's a steam engine being routed to a diesel engine instead of the other way around. Heck, a lot of the online train series I watch on YouTube have both steam and diesel engines view themselves as equals from the get-go with a few oddballs. Me, myself, I'm kind of in between on this. For what his punishment could have been, I can imagine that he got his livery and his streamlined casing taken away from him for a year and a half between The Great Race and the Bubba film. He constantly be a laughingstock to his American and Canadian cousins, especially Canadian National 6218 and Grand Truck Western 6325. As a personal side note, I just love the fact that his handrails almost make him look like he's wearing a hockey or football helmet. Anyways, as I don't want to interfere with Zach for the rest of the review, I'm going to end Vinny's segment on this epic note. unsportsmanlike conduct on Grand Track Western 6407. Trying to hurt an engine and interrupting the games. Number 6407 is ejected.
On top of it, he's tossed. Wow.
Okay, that's actually pretty funny right there.
That's definitely something I can agree with you on. That and the Apology Impossible note.
Shut it, Matt! Moving on. The Diesel subplot was pretty fun, especially with his musical number, I'm Full of Surprises, but again, barely any effect on the main story, except maybe for accidentally ruining Thomas's chances of going to the Great Railway Show. Except he goes there anyway to bring Gordon his safety valve, making that subplot pointless. The resolution to it was pretty funny, however. Although he does return to Sodor anyway, so yeah. Another pointless subplot that adds nothing to the main story. And now there's the main subplot, Gordon and Flying Scotsman. Since The Great Race came out, a lot of people have said that it would have worked better with the Gordon subplot as the main story, focusing on his sibling rivalry with Flying Scotsman. Yeah, I think it could have worked better that way as well, showing a more insecure side to the Big Blue engine and wanting to be the best. What if Scotsman was proud of being one of the first engines to travel the world, and Gordon became jealous of him for that, and so he wanted to beat his brother The Great Race, the event obviously, to prove that he's special too. We don't get enough out of that subplot to fully care, and when Gordon's boiler bursts, Scotsman just leaves him to die to win a meaningless race. Yeah, it was said that he helped Gordon finish the race, but you actually have to show us rather than just simply say, oh, that happened, don't worry about it, don't think about it too much. Gordon's subplot just fizzles out like it wasn't important, and it's abandoned in favor of Thomas winning the shunting challenge with Ashima. You might recall that I said the narrative makes Thomas look whiny and selfish, yet it expects me to root for him when he takes over for Percy at the shunting challenge. I get it if Percy didn't want to take part due to stage fright, but it completely devalues what he learned in Tale of the Brave. As someone who loves that special, that is nothing short of insulting. Doubly so in that it feels like it was done to make Thomas look good despite the fact that he acted selfishly in the first half. Oh, Rachel, this is becoming a habit.
I know. But I just wanted to interject about Percy real quick.
Yeah, what about it?
I think that Percy's subplot should have been somewhat akin to that of Hurricane Fluttershy from My Little Pony, in her words.
But that was different. That was an emergency. This whole tornado thing, it's more like a performance. And you know how I hate performing in front of others.
Tornado thing aside, that's what Percy's thought process should be. He acted bravely to save James from the rock slide, but the shunting challenge is a performance. Those two are very different situations. This would have been another step forward in Percy's development instead of taking 2 steps back. Thomas should have stepped aside and let Percy take on the role of being the shunting challenge competitor for Sodor.
Shame that it was thrown away because, in Mattel's eyes, kids don't relate to Thomas, and anyone who's not Thomas isn't relatable or interesting. But it's not just Percy. Henry sucks at the strength competition, James and Emily both lose the best decorated engine contest, Gordon gets a DNF at the Great Race itself, but Thomas sacrifices victory, gets rewarded for it, and everyone's happy. Boring. Oh, and to top it all off, we get one more reminder that you can only be yourself. Next to Thomas's behavior himself, that is the biggest problem with the Great Race. The moral is constantly shoved down your throat to the point that you think they may have based the story around it rather than the other way around. However, the be yourself message comes across as too broad. I mean, consider this line at the end.
I can only be me. There's nothing else I can possibly be. And now I'm happy, I am who I am. I'll be the best me that I can.
What does Thomas mean that there's nothing else he can possibly be? Was he told by Ashima that he should never change and develop? Because if that's the case, that is a very harmful lesson in the long run. Because how are you supposed to get far in life if you don't grow and develop? If Percy was himself by being a wimp and dropping out, he wouldn't go far in life. Nor would Philip when it came to not standing up for himself against Vinny. Yes, being yourself is a good thing, but if you had to bring out the best within you, develop your character so that your flaws don't matter in the end. The Great Race completely ignores this and altogether in favor of selling toys. Especially this moment.
I've got to get across! I can't stop
now! Seriously, that moment sucks just as much now as it did when it first came out. I heard that, you moron.
You're the moron here, Zach.
Oh, great. Here comes the
You just
fireworks
can't handle
display
me
of
bashing
temper.
that special you like, Matt.
And you can't handle the fact there are people who do like the Great Race, Zach.
Hold your iron horses, you two. Can we please get through this review without me getting out my medical kit, or Mike and I getting out our Mr. Conductor's whistles?
Nope. How many times have they been at each other's throats again?
Way too many times, apparently.
Well, anyway, Zach, mind if I have a say about that epic bridge jump scene?
Sure, Cam. Somebody told me that you wanted to bring it up.
Thanks. Like Zach here, even I have to agree with how much that scene sucked. There's just honestly no point of having to go through all that trouble to film that non-realistic epic scene. I get that Mattel wanted to make their Thomas specials exciting and action-packed, since there have been a few action-packed scenes from both Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure and Journey Beyond Sodor. But come on, even with a death-defying leap of faith like that, you could obviously point out everything that's wrong with this scene. First of all, how would Thomas even traverse up the bridge as it was slowly being lifted upwards? And secondly, he would either fall into the ocean or crash onto a passing cargo ship. Or even if he did reach the other side, he probably wouldn't even land perfectly on the rails at all. Don't get me wrong, I still think the special itself wasn't all bad in my opinion, but when it comes down to making good Thomas specials, making something that was supposed to be epic, there's just honestly no point of having to include that particular scene at all. It feels like they're really trying here, but my god, it's a clusterfuck to the eyes. Would a Thomas film like The Great Race go through all that trouble to film that bridge jump scene? And it just seems foolish.
Yeah, thanks for summing it up, Cam.
No problem, Zach.
I'm sorry, but clearly you both have forgotten all about this scene from The Great Discovery.
Suddenly, he crashed through a thick wall of bushes. He flew across a ravine and hit the ground with a bump.
That was different, Matt.
I seriously doubt it.
Can we just finish this already? The Great Race is a complete mess from start to finish, with subplots that go nowhere, an overdone world that comes off as tone deaf towards the end, and the fact that it feels like an hour-long toy commercial. It's the worst special since the Nitrogen era, and the tragic part is that there's a lot of potential behind it. And going off my idea for a Gordon-centric version, perhaps as the B plot, if Thomas had to be involved, what if his conflict with Gordon from Lost Treasure was carried over as it hasn't fully healed itself, because let's face it, conflict doesn't resolve itself overnight, and Thomas's motivation for bringing Gordon his safety valve is a self-reminder of their alliance from down the mine in Pink Pots and Queens. That's when he puts his grudge aside to save Gordon's life, and both apologize for their behavior in Lost Treasure, deciding that there are more important things than a petty grudge. Had that been the case, Mattel would have gotten another special with Thomas by playing a big role. Andrew Brenner and Ian McHugh could maintain continuity with previous works, older fans get to see some character development on display, and kids can learn something from it. Everyone wins. But as is, my rating for The Great Race is 2 out of 10. Worse than Misty Island Rescue, but still better than Day of the Diesels and Tapmar.
Can I just say that?
Whatever it is, I don't want to hear it, Matt. Let's just move on to the next special, okay?
Oh, me and my big mouth. I'll go get the medical kit. And Zach, save the frying pan for cooking in future. Don't be like Rapunzel, please.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
Well, talking about The Great Race took longer than I was expecting, but now, for the first time in 4 years, we can finally revisit Journey Beyond Sodor.
Wait, 4 years? Has it really been that long since we started this channel? My goodness, where has the time gone?
So you remember when we first reviewed Journey Beyond Sodor, right? Well, for those of you who don't, it was the second review that I did on this channel and became one of our most popular. In retrospect, however, I don't think it holds up if you compare it to our later reviews. I mean, I was particularly critical towards one person whom I shall not name simply because I disagreed with their views. Word of advice, people, if you want to make a counter-argument to one person's views, don't make fun of him because they don't line up with yours, okay? That's not cool, folks. It only leads to more internet drama. I didn't go for something big like that at the time, thankfully, but Mike and I wrote up the original review at a time when the special had recently come out, and the fandom was in a somewhat better place than they are now, but did lead to far worse things down the road online for the fandom. 2017 is a year that many fans would rather not remember, I'd imagine, even though what came out during that time was far better than they gave credit for. So, anyway, here are my revised thoughts on Journey Beyond Sodor. Frustrated with James's bragging about being the favorite engine, Thomas takes his trucks for the mainland and meets up a trio of experimental engines and Frankie and Hurricane, the engines who run as steelworks on the mainland. When Thomas doesn't return, James ventures to the mainland to find Thomas, but soon lands himself in trouble as well. Remember back in 2017 when people criticized the hell out of JBS in Series 21? I feel like people were way too harsh on them both, and the announcement of the next major reboot in Thomas and Friends practically overshadowed the quality of both special and season. I've already given my revised thoughts on Series 21, but what about Journey Beyond Sodor? Frankly, this special was not worth the controversy it caused over the trailer. Those that complained about the engines moving on their chassis and claiming it's unrealistic have been following the show about Taki Locomotive since childhood, so they're in no position to complain about realism. I'm getting that out of the way because that has zero effect on my opinions with Journey Beyond Sodor and the next special. Right out of the gate, I can safely say that Journey Beyond Sodor is a lot better than The Great Race. In fact, the story doesn't go off in multiple directions to the point you don't know what the main focus is. It's all about Thomas, envious that James is given a special job and takes the Red Engine's trucks, technically Henry's but still, so he could have an adventure. Thomas's character here is better than that of The Great Race, as he actually does redeem himself towards the end. Sure, he's selfish in the first act, but he actually gets consequences for it. Speaking of James, this is probably his best portrayal in the CGI series. Rob Rackstraw really brings the Red Engine's hamminess to life here, especially with his solo number, Somebody Has to Be the Favorite. But I think James really shines best in the third act when confronting Frankie and Hurricane when he ends up at the Steelworks. He'd been fucked over before, and he wasn't prepared to let that happen to him again. Which brings me on to the Steelworks duo. 3, 2, 1.
Hey Zach, have you gotten to talking about the Steelworks duo yet?
Good timing actually, Rachel. I was just about to do so.
Well, I do have something to say about Frankie. Her mannerisms come across as rather condescending. Looking back at the movie, she doesn't call Thomas by name once, just Little Tank Engine. She may come across as charming in her first instances, but she's quite a dangerous individual. Honestly, if Diesel continued down his darker path, I could see him ending up like this. But thank goodness this development curved back in the CGI era. If I had to summarize her as an MLP character, it's Cozy Glow. No questions about it. Both seem to come across as sweet talkers at first, but have ulterior motives. I don't think Frankie's redemption in this movie was justified at all. She could have, she did have crocodile tears by the end. If Diesel came across Frankie, I think he'd be scared as to what he could have become. What do you think, Zach?
Yeah, I'd hate to end up on the wrong side of Frankie, but I do agree that her redemption felt a bit shoehorned. Unlike a lot of My Little Pony villains I could mention, it doesn't really hurt JBS that much since this was Frankie's sole appearance in the series, and the lot beforehand was so good, so it doesn't make so much of a dent. Hurricane's redemption, however, I feel is more justified since we actually see him showing some concern for Thomas's safety when he derails. This is further solidified by saving Thomas with a molten slag and taking the bullet, so to speak.
Help! My front wheels! I'm melting! I'm melting!
Also, is it just me, or was it this clip along with that one?
Thomas, I have a feeling we're not on Sodor anymore.
That inspired the pop culture references we got in Series 23 and 24. That aside, Hurricane's my favorite out of the JBS newbies because of his redeeming qualities. He's one of the most complex characters to come out of Andrew Brenner and Ian McHugh, plus his basis is pretty cool for how unique it is. You can check out a video about that in the description below.
I'm not sure if I have much to say about Hurricane, but what I can say is that it's about time they finally introduced a steam engine to play as a villain for some parts of the special, since there have been past Thomas specials that have diesel engines as antagonists that we remember seeing. So I have to say, thank goodness they finally made that a reality in this Thomas special for once. That is pretty much all I have to say for the time being. Sorry that's not much I can contribute.
Well, thanks anyway, Cam. But speaking of unique engines, there's the experimental trio, Theo, Lexi, and Merlin. Out of him, I relate to Theo the most because I'm someone who's on the autistic spectrum. I can be pretty shy in real life, not to mention very blunt and straightforward, but I do care for others. I would say that Theo is a very good representative for autistic children. I don't know much about gender fluidity myself, but Lexi is, at the very least, fluid in multiple accents and dialects. They are pretty optimistic for someone who doesn't think that they're that useful. Yes, I view Lexi as non-binary, you got a problem with that? But they're still pretty excitable and idealistic, and at the best of times all the same. Being a Cap 4 engine themselves, Lexi surely is a one-of-a-kind for the show. Finally, there's Hugh Bonneville as Merlin, the Invisible Engine.
Invisibility on!
Out of the trio, Merlin doesn't have the most unique or interesting personality. He's pretty much the father/big brother figure of the trio, but there's only so much you can do with it, even with a personality quirk like thinking he can turn invisible. Still, Hugh Bonneville makes for a charismatic performance as Merlin, and honestly, I can't imagine Merlin being voiced by anyone else. It's a shame that the one episode he appeared in the actual show, Seeing is Believing, was pretty underwhelming. Finally, there's Beresford, the Canal Crane. It's debatable as to how much of a purpose he actually serves in Journey Beyond Sodor, but he does learn something when he meets with Thomas twice. You simply can't force people to be friends with you. Plus, the reason Beresford acts the way he did was kind of understandable, as being stuck in one place for so long with no one to talk to can drive anyone mad.
Makes you wonder how Duke kept his sanity intact when he didn't have anyone to turn to.
Well, he did go to sleep to pass the time, didn't he?
Yeah, that is true, but he could have woken up every once in a while and wondered why no one had come to rescue him.
Out of the Brenner specials, Journey Beyond Sodor has probably the strongest set of newbies, along with Tale of the Brave and So Is Legend of a Lost Treasure. It has the strong character dynamics of the former and the action and peril of the latter. It's almost like the middle ground between the two, but it's not that hard to point out issues with the story, among them being Percy not showing any courage in trying to rescue Thomas. But then again, Thomas had more of a conflict with James, and that doesn't really have a big impact on the story, so unlike The Great Race, it's not a huge deal.
If I was doing Percy's minor bit in Journey Beyond Sodor, I'd make it more along the lines of it being an adult fear. Maybe he irrationally tries to go save Thomas, only to be stopped before he leaves due to an insufficient coal and water capacity.
A bigger problem I'd point out is the geography of James's journey to find Thomas. Thomas goes past Vickerstown to some random junction, Beresford's Canal, and the Experimental Trio's yard and the Steelworks. Yet James gets to Bridlington Yards without issue and somehow manages to go past Beresford's Canal and towards the Steelworks. I just felt confused having written that.
Maybe the signalman's at the tracks wrong? That's the best explanation I've got.
Or maybe the trucks that Thomas was pulling had broken his concentration and accidentally ran over a few points set to the wrong lines. That pretty much sums it up when I first saw it, even.
Either way, they should have improved the mapping for this sequence. But probably the biggest problem with Journey Beyond Sodor is the ending. It's pretty anticlimactic given that Frankie is forgiven so easily, not to mention her motivations being half-baked, and that the most important thing is being friends was a pretty weak ending song. But does that destroy the special for me? No. Everything else beforehand was really good for the most part, so the weak ending doesn't really hurt the special by a whole lot.
I'd also like to say that Topham Hatt was a bit of an issue here. You'd think he'd have more urgency with Thomas going missing, but instead he's rambling on about reshuffling the engines just because that's what the railway controller does. Any thoughts on that, Zach?
Some fans have gone off on him being too harsh with Thomas in Lost Treasure, but as it turns out, you can go too far in the other direction. He was too lenient on Thomas for taking James's train, technically Henry's but still, and throwing the timetables astray. Surely that would have been just as serious as wasting dynamite.
Only in this situation, Thomas wasn't putting anyone's life at risk. Arguably, but I digress.
When Mike and I first covered Journey Beyond Sodor back in 2017, I gave it a 7 out of 10. Looking back on this special for Sodorama, in hindsight, I genuinely loved it as its world that there's a place for everyone, regardless of how they look or whether or not they have a disability. With recent events in real life, that moral has resonated with me a lot more than it did a few years ago. Coupled with some of the best character moments in the Brenner era, and with Theo being an adorable cinnamon roll that deserves protection at all costs, my revised ranking for Journey Beyond Sodor is a strong 9 out of 10, right behind So Is Legend of a Lost Treasure and Tale of the Brave. And now we come to the final special of the original show, Big World Big Adventures. The special that, along with series 22 to 24, splintered an already fickle fandom into a billion pieces. I think the review that Mike, Matt, Rachel, Karen, and I did a couple of years back holds up pretty well, but is there anything I can add that we haven't already? Encouraged by an Australian racing car named Ace, Thomas finally fulfills his dream to see the world, and on his journey, he's aided by a Kenyan tank engine called Nia. Along the way, Thomas finds himself stuck between idealism and reality when it comes to true friendship. Well, there's not really a whole lot that I can add, to be honest. Big World Big Adventures has that road trip vibe, and the story is pretty low-key for what it is. It relies a lot on the strength of the characters to pull through to the end, with Thomas, Nia, and Ace being the audience surrogate, the realistic side of friendship, and an idealized view on friendship, respectively. Representing idealized friendship, paradoxically, Ace is simultaneously the special's biggest problem, and one of its cleverest hidden messages. Let me explain. With Ace's first scene when racing alongside Flying Scotsman, he's straight away seen as a carefree, reckless, irresponsible, jumping onto the tracks and treating it as if it's not a safety concern. Then when he meets with Thomas, he encourages him to come see the world with him, and when they arrive at the start of the race in the Sahara, Ace abandons Thomas despite the latter insisting that they came together. That should have been a red flag to Thomas that Ace wasn't who he seemed to be. At first glance, Ace appears to be a cool guy we can look up to, but when he abandons Thomas, we can tell that he only acts friendly around Thomas when he decides it's convenient for him. When people say never meet your heroes, this is probably what they mean by that. Then, Thomas briefly encounters Ace again on a ship to Brazil, and the race car subtly tells the Blue Tank Engine that he doesn't need anyone like Nia following him around. And this eventually comes to a head when Thomas and Ace abandon Nia in Arizona, and what makes it worse is that Thomas had begun showing respect towards Nia for their trip through the Amazon rainforest. This is what makes Thomas realize that he'd messed up badly with Nia, and realizes that she was the true friend the whole time while Ace had been manipulating him. That being said, Thomas ends up abandoning Ace in Utah, and their conflict is never properly resolved in Series 24. Why they made an episode about Ace being afraid of Australian wildlife rather than learning to be a better friend, I'll never understand.
That probably still makes Ace probably not a villain, but somewhat a troublemaker if you think about it. I know that I already made my views about Ace back in our Big World Big Adventures review, but I think at this point I could add in more as to what I really think about him. The moment I first saw Ace when he made his debut in the film, I could already sense that he was going to be trouble, and it turns out that I was right. But why, you might ask? Well, for starters, he makes himself known to Thomas and explains to him that he is competing in a worldwide rally across 5 continents. That information brainwashed Thomas into following him by leaving Sodor via ship, and yet he never worries about leaving the island he called his true home. That's the second time he left Sodor without thinking that his friends would worry about him going missing. How clueless does that tank engine have to be? Not only that, but not once did he ever think about his 2 coaches, Annie and Clarabelle, the coaches he was rewarded with since season 1. It feels like he left them behind on purpose. Actually, you know what? I wouldn't really blame Thomas for leaving Sodor at all. If anything, maybe Ace was to blame for putting those silly ideas into his head, like Gordon once did in Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure. I know that Ace isn't really a bad car in general, but what I don't understand is why Thomas would go on to forgive him when they both met again, after all that trouble Ace made him and Nia go through during their travels.
And speaking of not resolving conflicts, Sir Topham Hatt's on a ship to China, and then he asks Ace if he's seen Thomas, and then the special comes to an abrupt halt before we get an answer. I thought we'd get an answer in Series 22 as to how Sir Topham Hatt returned to Sodor and reacted upon learning that Thomas is back there again, but nope, he's back on Sodor without explanation, nor do we find out that Thomas got scolded for running off like that.
Remember what I said about the Fat Controller snapping so hard at Thomas if he ever did return home to Sodor in our Big World Big Adventures review? It's possible that it might have happened had they not ended it so soon in the dumbest way possible.
Maybe for a twist, Sir Topham Hatt does make it home on another engine, yells out Thomas's name, the Blue Tank Engine sheepishly says hello to him, and cuts to black. Probably would have turned out a bit better as it gives us all the information we need. So Topham's returned, and Thomas realizes he's in trouble with him. Oh, and maybe kick off Forever and Ever if the episode's kept at the 8-minute 45 runtime, with Thomas shunting in the yards as punishment.
Yeah, that would be a suitable punishment for him. Then that conflict would have been resolved and put to rest. But like I said, it could happen like it did back in Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure. Imagine how furious the Fast Controller will be if he ever does return back to Sodor and finds Thomas again.
This is where my ranking for Big World Big Adventures comes in. If we had given individual rankings back in 2019, I would have given it around a 6 out of 10. Rewatching this special, I don't know. I kinda wanted to rank this one higher. The character moments are some of the best ever in the franchise, the story is simple yet easy to grasp, and the message about friendship was really good. I said it's worthy of an 8 out of 10, probably even a 9. However, it's the sudden, abrupt ending that drags it down, but not enough to call it awful. And so, my rating remains a 6 out of 10. So, that's 6 of the burner specials that I've covered for this video, 5 of which are of a high standard in their own right. King of the Railway started things off with a whisper rather than a bang, but it was Tale of the Brave and Swords Legend of a Lost Treasure that showed just how brilliant a Thomas movie could be with the right people in charge. But from there, the next 3 specials fell victim to being a tough act to follow. The Great Race was an underwhelming mess, but thankfully Journey Beyond Sodor would go on to prove that it was just a fluke, and I dare argue that Big World Big Adventures would be top tier material if not for the rushed ending. And I don't know another note, can we stop comparing the Ladder Free specials to Lost Treasure? Yes, I know it set the bar very high for Thomas and Friends specials, but if you're going to keep battering on about the next special not living up to that standard, well, you're quite foolish to think that. 13 out of the 14 Thomas and Friends specials we got are not Lost Treasure, nor do they need to be. We only got one Lost Treasure, and with the mere existence of All Engines Go, that's all we're ever going to receive. Likewise, simply begging for another movie like Citizen Kane, To Kill a Mockingbird, or, for an animated example, The Lion King, simply puts a lot of unfair pressure on the creators of a film. For the same reason, if someone goes on to call a creator the next George Lucas or Walt Disney, that creator will never be able to form their own identity. Every creator in film that exists, ever existed, or will exist one day is unique. It also applies to Thomas and Friends. We had one Wilbur Audrey, and we still have one Brett Allcroft and one Andrew Brenner. Sure, you can emulate their writing style without feeling like too much of a pastiche, but even then, you still have your own unique way of writing. Just look at me, for example. My writing for Thomas and Friends fanfiction is inspired from the Brenner era, but even then, I am the one and only Zach Wanzer in existence, and ever will be.
True words have never been spoken, brother.
Thanks. Well, that tangent went on a bit longer than I was expecting. Anyway, my average ranking for the 6 main Brenner specials is a 7.3 out of 10, a big improvement over the Nitrogen specials. Include my ratings for those 4 along with Calling All Engines and The Great Discovery. The average rating thus far is 5.6 out of 10. Overall, the specials are above average, but when they're good, they're really good. That's 13 specials down, and only one more to go. By process of elimination, I think that you can guess already as to what it is, so keep an eye out there that, after that's done, that'll be it for Sodorama. Unless that Mark Forster film actually gets off the ground, and in which case, I will most likely view it either as a brief Sodorama revival or an Emotions Corner episode. We'll see where it goes in the future.
Until then, I'm off to watch The Great Race, one of the greatest Thomas specials out there.
Wait, I thought I knocked you out with that frying pan. Anyway, I think you mean it's more like one of the worst.
Oh, come on! You're still going on about it?
Yes I am. The Great Race is one of the worst specials to come out of Thomas and Friends. You know it, and nothing will make me change my mind.
It's one of the best, and you know it.
Worst.
Best.
Worst.
Worst.
I'd say it's one of the best, and if you can't handle it, then go to hell. Wait, what did I just say?
Well, Zach, you finally admitted it. You admitted The Great Race is good. I knew it all along. Oh, and one more thing. That was for doing it to me regarding Forever and Fucking Ever.
Get back here, you Canadian jackhole!
Not one day of this ever happening.
Not again.
Are these guys always at each other's throats like this?
You don't know the half of it, buddy.
Yep, even I questioned that once when I first joined. Rachel, I think it's about time to get the med kit out again.
Okay, I'm getting it. Wait, Mike, who had it last time?
It was you. Why?
Duh, it's under my notes for the Season 5 Redux and the Thomas and Troublesome Diesel rewrites. Just great. I'll just sort through that later.
Take a listen and look around. Do you hear all those wonderful sounds? From these marvelous machines is a steam-powered beam, working day and night and shore to shore. These are the sounds of Sodor.